It's getting to the point where I'm no fun anymore. Now that is the lyrics of one of my favorite songs, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. It comes off my number 4 favorite album of all time, which is Crosby, Stills, and Nash, which came out in 1969. Yeah, one of the greatest folk rock albums of all time, and the greatest supergroup I think ever put together, basically. What a phenomenal album. And I'm so excited this is one of my favorite groups to talk about. So I'm excited to talk about this album and this group and how this whole album came together and the amazing songs in it anyways. And by the way, I'm Jason from Jason the Old Millennial. This is me in my basement in the great state of Kansas. And I hope everybody's doing well. And let's get to this great, great album here on my 100 Greatest Albums, number 4, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well here on a Wednesday. Glad to get back to the series. I'm almost done with my top 100 favorite albums at the moment when I made this list a couple years ago. And this is definitely always going to be high on my list. And one of my favorite groups of all time, super groups, you would say, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. There they are. We got David Crosby. We got Stephen Stills, and we got Graham Nash there sitting on the couch. Man, I mean, you're talking about one of the best harmony groups of all time. And yeah, I fell in love with this group back when I was a teenager, and I first heard Sweet Judy Blue Eyes on my dad. In fact, I was watching VH1's like 100 best songs of all time or something like that, and Sweet Judy Blue Eyes showed up, and I was like, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, what is that? Interesting title for a song. Never heard of that song. Didn't hear it on the radio, I guess, at that time. I used to listen to a lot of oldies at that time. And my dad talked to me about, oh, this is really great song from this really great group of these 3 individuals that kind of came together from 3 different bands and created this super group where they just use their last names so they can take so if they left, they could just take their name off the title. If they added somebody, they can just add it, which they did with Neil Young and created Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young at one point. But yeah, when I was like, I need to listen to this, I actually got their Greatest Hits album, which I actually have on vinyl, which I didn't pull out. Look, I pulled it out just without even almost not looking. But I got this on CD back when I was a teenager. I have it on vinyl now. This is So Far, which is basically it's like a greatest hits, but it's only from the first 2 albums, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Deja Vu, basically, and then like 2 B-side singles. But I got this, I remember I saw this at Walmart on CD, and I was like, oh, I really want to listen to Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young or whatever, because I keep hearing all these great things about them. And yeah, as soon as I heard Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, which is the first song on this Best Of album, I was like, man, this is amazing. This is like one of the greatest songs I've ever heard in my life. Like, the harmonies were amazing. The musicianship was amazing. I was like, wow, I got to listen. And of course, I listened to the whole album. I was like amazed. I was like, wow, I never heard a album before. I just heard the compilation or the Best Of album. And all I knew was like, man, I know this is the best of their songs, but this is one of the greatest hits albums I've ever heard. And a lot of songs I didn't know anything about, I heard for the first time on that album. And I just blown away again by the harmonies, are just the best harmonies ever. And I didn't even know the individual groups really, wasn't that familiar with the bands that they were from at that time at all. And so I definitely had to learn a lot about them after that point. And it wasn't until much later that I actually listened to this album, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Deja Vu. Because again, I wasn't listening to albums really at that time in my life. I mean, I did have some CD albums. Mostly they were newer albums. Actually, I mostly owned albums from the 90s period. Because that's when I started listening to new music in the 90s, about 95. I was picking up all that kind of music, and into the 2000s when I was in, kind of in the high school, college days. That's when I was listening to new music and getting the CDs. I didn't really buy albums, old albums except for maybe the Beatles. I had some Beatle albums maybe, but that was about it. So I wasn't really that familiar with albums, really. I was mostly interested in singles and songs. Of course, when I was in high school, iTunes became a big thing. And so if I liked it, like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, I liked them. So I would go on iTunes and take all of their songs. And at the time, it was only like $1 per song. So, you can spend $20 to get 20 songs or whatever, and burn it on a CD, and you got a really cool compilation album. And that's what I did for a lot of my favorite bands and groups, and just randomly, just songs I liked, I wanted to put on an album myself. So instead of listening to albums, I just put a bunch of songs I like on an album, made my own albums. So it wasn't really too recently that I really started listening to the actual albums, of course. And I knew Crosby, Stills, Nash was a group that I was going to really love their albums. And I do. They have some really good albums. And this, like I said, number 4 on my list. So pretty, yeah, you can say I'm a pretty big fan. And then later, of course, I recently kind of got more into their individual bands as well. And also, I should say, I saw this Crosby, Stills, and Nash in concert back in 2005. Crosby and Nash came out with an album called Crosby and Nash at that time. A really good album, too, that made it on my 100 favorite albums list. Another album you have to listen to. So it's cool getting to listen to some of those new songs for the first time, going, wow, these are some good new songs. Also hearing all their big hits off of these albums, like this and Deja Vu especially, or really all their hit songs were off of those 2 albums that I heard in the concert. And get to hear them sing it live, even back in 2005, was just amazing. And one of my favorite concerts I ever got to see. So I've read Graham Nash's autobiography, Wild Tales, and I've also read a biography on the group called Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young or something like that. I can't remember who wrote it, but I don't have it. I got it from the library, I think. A couple years ago I read it, and it was a really cool book, kind of detailing their whole history. So it's definitely one of those bands I know quite a bit of information about. One of the most, I say bands, I don't know what you call them, band or group, whatever. One of the most interesting groups to me personally. I'm always fascinated by how this group got together, their songs that they put together, these albums, especially the first 4 albums to me are just absolutely amazing. All 4 albums made it to my top 100 favorite albums list, the first 4 albums. So yeah, big fan of this group. And this is my favorite out of the 4. A lot of people say Deja Vu. Deja Vu is very close. I put this barely ahead of Deja Vu, but it's very close. Both this album, Deja Vu, are some of the greatest albums ever, I think, created. Anyway, so, but yeah, I don't know if I showed there's another group shot of them, pretty cool, in their coats and everything. And then there's a guy in the back window for some reason. But yeah, very simple cover, but iconic. But yeah, this came out, like I said, 1969. It's their debut album. I mean, it's just incredible. This is one of the best debut albums. I would say the best debut album of all time, because it's the highest debut album on my list. I'm just crazy that these 3 got together and immediately had this great chemistry together as singers, especially, and songwriters and all that. And they come up with this absolutely amazing album right out the gate. It didn't do as well as I think it should have, personally. I mean, still did pretty well, still put them on the map, and they were doing a lot of concerts, and people were really into them, because folk rock was still getting, even though it's more of a psychedelic rock, getting into the hard rock era in 1969, their folk rock sound still was still doing very well with the crowds. And they their second gig Neil Young would join them after this album, actually pretty soon after this album, and their second concert together was Woodstock. And but it's really good if you watch the documentary Woodstock, and you see them on there. They do a really good version of some of these songs on there. I mean, they only had 1 album out at that time, which is crazy. But yeah, great debut album. It went number 6 in the U.S. and number 25 in the U.K. So better in the U.S. Top 10 album. I mean, should be number 1. I mean, it's crazy. And only number 25 in the U.K. Come on, you got to be a top 10 U.K. And they only had 2 singles out of here, and there's a couple of songs here that are like on their greatest albums list. I mean, these are some of the greatest songs they've ever come up with. But the 2 singles, interesting enough, are Marrakesh Express, which was a single that Graham Nash brought to the table from his Holly days when he was with the Hollies. Actually, there's a demo you can find of the Hollies singing the song, which is not as good as this version, but of course they were just in the demo stages, but they never put on an album. So it's a song that he wrote with the Hollies, but he got to put on this album. and a really great song. Went number 28 in the U.S., number 17 in the U.K. And then Sweet Judy Blue Eyes is really the big number on here that everybody talks about. It's the grandiose song, epic song of theirs. And it went number 21 in the US. I don't see that charted in the UK at all, but I can't believe that's not a number one song. Maybe because it's too long. It is a fairly long song. But man, that's one of the greatest songs of all time, in my opinion. It should be a number one in total. And they also won a Grammy for Best New Artist, so they did get that. Very deserved there. But I want to talk a little bit about the band itself and how it got together and made this album. Like I said, this to me is the greatest supergroup ever put together, and one of the first supergroups put together. I think you might say Cream maybe came before this. Maybe it was kind of a supergroup. I don't know. There might be some other ones in there, but to me, this is by far the best supergroup, I think. And you might say the Traveling Wilburys, but Traveling Wilburys only made 2 albums, and they really didn't do a lot of. I don't know if they did any concerts together. They weren't really a band. They were just kind of put together for 2 albums, and they really weren't as cohesive as this group is very cohesive. They've done a lot of music together, but of course we have to go with. They came from 3 different bands, all Hall of Fame, all in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is crazy to me that each member is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice. Once for their bands before, and then once for Crosby, Stills, and Nash. We'll talk about David Crosby. David Crosby came from the Byrds, another band I'll cover at some point on here. I've listened to all their discography as well, and we'll do a deep dive. Byrds obviously coming around 1965 with kind of the first folk rock. I mean, they are the first folk rock group. It kind of invented the genre, basically. And Dave Crosby kind of joined Gene Clark and Roger McGuinn, and they formed kind of the basis of Byrds, and then they added a bass player and a drummer, and they came out with Mr. Tambourine Man, which went number 1, and then they made an album that was a great album, which was pretty high on my list, in fact. And anyways, Dave Crosby made a couple albums with them. I want to say 3 or 4 albums, and then he was basically fired from the band. Crosby was a very troublemaking individual, did a lot of drugs, from California. His dad was an Oscar-winning cinematographer, actually, in Hollywood, and Crosby was going to be an actor. He did acting. That was kind of his. He thought he was going to be a professional actor. He did plays and stuff, I think, and maybe went to acting school or something like that. But he also was really into music and in the music scene, and the folk scene was really big in California, and that's where he met McGuinn and Clark, who were became this folk duo at the time. And then he kind of said, "Hey, I want to join you guys," and they're like, "I guess." And they joined, and I would say he was not one of the better songwriters or singers in the group, but he was great at harmonizing. He was always a great harmonizer with other people, so he always fit in pretty good with other groups in that way. Anyways, but he was, like I said, a drunk and a drug addict, big drug addict. Rock and roller, womanizer, partier, all that kind of stuff. One of the worst ones probably at that period. And he was fighting with the group, and he joined, actually, I think, Buffalo Springfield, because Neil Young, I don't think, showed up for the gig, and so he played with them or something like that, if I remember that story right. And McGuinn was not happy that he joined another band during this concert, this big concert with a bunch of bands. And he also would do these rants when he got on the microphone. He would rant about, I think he said JFK was assassinated by the government or something. I don't know. He had all these weird conspiracies, and all that. And it's very controversial, and he just wasn't. And he just I don't think he was very good at coming on time to rehearsals, and like I said, he was drunk a lot or on drugs, so he was not reliable, and so he got kicked out of the band. And so interesting enough, he had a sailboat. He loved to sail, and so he took a sailboat and sailed around Canada, and he stopped by a bar in Canada, and someone was singing, and he thought, "Oh, this person's really good singer and a guitar player." And went to see who it was, and it was a girl named Joni Mitchell, who wasn't well known at that time in Canada, and he kind of discovered her and said, "Hey, come with me, and I'll get you, maybe a gig in America." And so she went with him, and he got her a contract, of course, and she ended up having a Hall of Fame career herself as a solo artist, which is an absolutely crazy kind of story. But he came back to California, and that's where we meet Stephen Stills. Stephen Stills, he started a band called Buffalo Springfield, also around 65, I believe, joined by Neil Young, who would join the group later on. But he came out with a hit song, For What It's Worth, which was like a #1 hit. And so they came out with an album called Buffalo Springfield. Really good album, by the way, that made my top 100 favorite albums. Also, their second album was actually quite good too, Buffalo Springfield again. But Neil Young was not happy that he didn't get to sing his own songs on the album, on the first album, and he eventually kind of quit the group after the second album. And then they made a third album. Neil Young basically quit the group by that point, so they basically were done at that point. But they put out a third album, which I don't think is particularly that great. But Buffalo Springfield basically imploded at that point, and everybody kind of quit, and the band was no more, which is crazy because they came out of the gate pretty strong, and but then couldn't last very long. They could have been a great group too if they would stay together, I think. But Stephen Stills was a great guitar player and songwriter, and was one of the lead singers of the group. And so he no longer had a band, and so he was hanging out with David Crosby and Joni Mitchell, and of course doing lots of drugs and writing songs together and singing together, and all that. Then comes in the story of Graham Nash. Graham Nash, of course, was in England, not in America, and he was not part of the folk rock group, but of the British Invasion. Him and Alan Clark were friends in school who found out they sang pretty good together, and so they formed a duo and went around and sang in bars. Really wanted to be like the next Everly Brothers. They were really big fans of the Everly Brothers. But then they got a manager who said you need a full band. So then they brought in like Tony Hicks eventually, and Bobby Elliott on drums, and I forget the bass player. But they bring in a whole band. And then when the Beatles hit big, all the other British Invasion bands hit pretty big too. And Holly's got a record deal, and they went off running again around, I want to say 65 or so, 64, 65. They eventually come out with some big hits. Graham Nash with the Hollies. Graham Nash and Al Clark were kind of the lead singers and writers of the group, though they did a lot of cover songs as well, and other people wrote songs that they did. But a lot of huge hits like Bus Stop and Carrie Ann and On a Carousel is great. Look Through Any Window, Jennifer Eccles, lots of great stuff. Again, great harmonies, really good British Invasion band. When Graham Nash came over to America, and he met up with he first became friends with Mama Cass, Mama Cass seems to be like one of those people of the Moms and Papas. Mama Cass seemed to be like one of those people that kind of was friends with everybody. She was really good at socializing, I guess, and just knowing everybody and kind of showing people around and all that. And so she kind of was the one who kind of showed Graham Nash around and introduced him to other musicians at that period, and introduced him to Crosby and Stills, which he took off right away. Seems like he brought they were friends pretty quickly. He really loved hanging out with them. He really loved America. He liked America better than his home country of Great Britain. I think because of all the freedom and just overall freedom that we had in America, which is much different than, and also just what's the word? I don't know. We just in America, we invent a lot of things. That's not the word I want to say. We're just, as far as, entertainment, everything, we're kind of on the forefront. And so he really liked it in America. And he went back to Great Britain with the Hollies, but he was trying to push the Hollies to be more experimental, I think, and a little bit deeper in the writing than just these catchy pop songs that they were doing. But they weren't really catching on with the Hollies, and he wasn't enjoying that. So he wasn't really enjoying being in the group. He was getting divorced from his wife at the time, and he was really not liking Great Britain that much. He really wanted to come to America and be in America and hang out with the American musicians, and he thought he liked that. So then he eventually quit the group in the late 60s, probably around 68, 69, whatever. which is crazy because he's one of the guys who really started the group, and he quit the group when they're still at the height of their success. They're still, a very successful band in England. But he quits and comes to America to hang out with Stills, Crosby, and Joni Mitchell, which he would date for a little while as well. Anyway, so the four of them were hanging out, probably listening to music, singing music, doing drugs, whatever. And so that kind of forms what we formed the Crosby, Stills, Nash when they were hanging out together. And according to Nash, they all had different stories on how this happened, but according to, I can say with Nash in his autobiography, Crosby and Stills were singing, they were writing like songs together, and they were singing a song together, and Nash just kind of came in and was like, let me sing along with you, and I'm going to sing the high part, because Nash had a really great tenor voice, and he could sing the high part. And so they were singing, and Nash sang the high part and harmonized with them, and they kind of stopped and looked at each other like, wow, that was amazing. Like, we sounded really good there. And they did it again, and they're like, wow, we really got something here. Like, we got a special sound. We need to, put together an album, basically. And so they did it pretty quickly. I mean, it was a pretty quick turnaround from them just kind of meeting and realizing how good they were together, that they were like, okay, let's get in the studio, let's put something together, And luckily, all three of them had songs that they can bring to the table. Nash had some songs, like I said, from his holidays that he can bring in. Crosby was always writing songs, of course, from his birthdays and so forth, and same thing with Stills. And so all three of them brought some songs together that and worked on it together. And of course, they brought in a bass player and like a drummer to play with them and all that. And went in the studio, and they were kind of putting this album together. And really, Stills is really the mastermind behind the group, though. He was the one that was really putting the album together. He was staying after hours. He was staying up all night, mixing and whatever, I guess, and overdubs and redoing parts. And he was the main guitar player. He was doing all the lead guitar parts, and I think probably just about all the guitar parts he was doing them. He'd also do the bass. I mean, he's such a incredible musician. Steven Stills, I think he's the most talented of the group. He would do bass parts. He'd even do drums. He would do like pretty much all the instruments and do like overdubs, whatever, redos. And he spent a lot of time in the studio putting this album together. So really, I think Steven Stills is maybe the most important member of the group, though. Graham Nash is probably my favorite member. Just I think he has the best voice, and he brings together a lot of times some of the best songs on the albums. But and no offense to Crosby, to me he's the least. He's an okay singer, but he's not as good, I think, as the other two. And he's not as good of a songwriter, but he's great at harmonizing with them, so he does fit in with the group. But to talk about the songs here, I mean, the very first song they come out with is Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. Like I said, written by Steven Stills, and this was the last song they put on the album, which is really an incredible story. They had this album just about done, but they felt like, we don't have that signature song. We need that one really great song to really make this a great album. Like they felt like they're missing something. And then Steven Stills came in one day and said, hey, I think I got the song for us, which was Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. And he had an acoustic guitar, and he played the whole song and sang all the parts on acoustic guitar, which would, to me, I would love to be a fly on the wall to hear Stills bring that song for the first time to Nash and Crosby, and them listening to it and going, wow, that was great. Yeah, that was the song. And them putting together, and the harmonies, like I said, some of the best harmonies I've ever heard. And it's such a cool song because there's three different parts to it. Like I said, it's getting to the point where I'm no fun anymore. Like I said at the beginning, it's part of the song, and then they all of a sudden there's like a instrument interlude, and then all of a sudden the song changes. It's totally different from the first part. And they go, and then the third part is just this do 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 do. Just amazing harmonies there, and just a fun ending to the song. But yeah, it's a masterful song. You have to listen. If you've never listened to Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, put down whatever you have in your hand and listen to it. It is amazing. In fact, the first two songs are the two singles, I just realized. The second song is Marrakesh Express, which I said Nash brought from his holidays. Really great song about being on a train in Marrakesh. Again, great harmonies. Really cool. Sounds like they're on a train. Really like that song. Third song, Guinevere, which is a Crosby song, which I actually really like, and it's on this album as well. This Greatest Hits album. The group I'm with, I usually collaborate with, nobody seems to like the song but me. It's really good. It's a slower song. It's more, like I said, this is more of acoustic. This is more of a folk rock album. So it's a lot more acoustic like, I would say, which I love. The acoustic guitars on here are really great. Unlike Deja Vu, which is more of a rock album, I think, compared to this one. But yeah, Guinevere, still just amazing harmonies. I've heard Crosby and Nash do this as well together. They do it really well as like a duo. You Don't Have to Cry, a solid Stephen Stills song. Pre-Road Downs, a solid Graham Nash song on here. And that's side one. Side two, we start with Wooden Ships, which is both Stills and Crosby wrote this song. Wooden Ships is one of my favorite on here as well. It is a really great song with a lot of cool parts to it and great chorus. And when I heard them sing it live, man, it was amazing. Lady of the Island, a really good Graham Nash song here. And then we get Helplessly Hoping. It's another Stephen Stills. I say Nash is my favorite. My two favorite songs on here are Stephen Stills songs, though. So Stills definitely is absolutely amazing. And it's really the MVP of this album, I think, Stephen Stills, because Helplessly Hoping is one of my favorite songs of all time, right behind Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. My second favorite Crosby, Stills, Nash song. Why this is so high on my list, because it has my two favorite Crosby, Stills, Nash songs, which are two of the greatest songs of all time, in my opinion. Helplessly Hoping, another just great three-part harmony to it, and one of the best three-part harmonies I've ever heard. I mean, it's just, when you hear it, you're just like, oh my gosh, I've never heard anything like, I didn't know songs could be like this. I didn't know it was possible to make a song like this and sound so amazing vocally. Anyway, so vocals just absolutely amazing, plus a great acoustic guitar part to it. Really cool how it's arranged as well. But yeah, definitely check out Helplessly Hoping. So amazing. And then we got Long Time Gone by Crosby. Actually a really good song. Really good version of the song with what's his name? Tom Jones sings the song really well. There's a good version with him where he really belted out. And then we end with 49 Bye-Byes, which is another solid Stills song. But what really makes this album so amazing is, like I said, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, Marrakesh Express, Guinevere, Wooden Ships, Helplessly Hoping. I mean, those 5 songs on its own is some of the amazing songs I think I've ever heard. Some great harmonies, and awesome to see them sing in concert when I did anyways. But yeah, so that's kind of the basis of this album, how it came together, and kind of started their career as a trio, and then they added Neil Young for the next album, 1970, for Deja Vu. But yeah, I can't say enough about how amazing the song is. I mean, if you like harmonies, you like folk rock, this is one of the greatest albums of that era of all time. Anyways, it's a must listen to album, in my opinion. That's why it's number 4 on my list. But let's get to my top 3 favorite songs. And I kind of talked about them a lot already, but number 3, I have Wooden Ships. Like I said, man, love how it begins. And then it's such a cool contrast when you get to the verse into the chorus and the 3-part harmonies. It's a really great chorus. Musicianship wise, I can't say enough. The music is so great. The bass player they have here, the drummer, along with the acoustic guitar playing, is so good as well. Really great song. Number 2, I have Helplessly Hoping. Like I said, one of the greatest harmony songs of all time. It's up there. Just a really beautiful song that I can listen to that so many times and get mesmerized by it. I'm just like, oh, it's so great. And then number 1, like I said, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. It has to be number 1. It's crazy that's the first song on the album. They hit you with the best song. I mean, right out of the gate, bam! Here's one of the greatest songs of all time. Like I said, it's a top 10 song for me of all time, and my favorite Crosby, Stills, Nash song. That's why it's so high on my list here. Like I said, just the 3 parts that are put together, 3 songs in one basically, and all the great melodies and harmonies, musicianship. It's just a masterpiece song, and that's why it's number 1 on my list. Yeah, so that's it. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, number 4 on my 100 favorite albums list. 3 albums left to go. I'm getting really close to getting to ending this series, but man, it's so fun talking about these great albums and some of my favorite albums of all time anyway. So definitely check this out. Crosby, Stills, Nash, amazing. Yeah, so comment if you heard this album, if you like this album, what songs you like the most. love to read any comments. I really appreciate that. And just thank you a lot to anybody who's watching this video. Thank you for liking it. And thank you to all my subscribers for supporting the channel. I appreciate you all, and I hope you have a good day.